Go. I'm going to hand it all over now and they're going to get started on your live reading for you.
Thank you, Emily. This is Mike Miller, and I will be reading first of all, we'll start off with the national and international news from the New York Times. First story is about the presidential primaries. Trump in a sweep of eastern states, Clinton wins in 4. Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton barreled toward a general election showdown on Tuesday night as they dominated primaries in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and other eastern states, piling up enough delegates to close in on their party's nominations. Looking past their fading rivals, the two even taunted each other in dueling election night events. Mrs. Clinton chided the Republicans' penchant for harsh language by saying that love trumps hate. Mr. Trump was more bluntly dismissive of Mrs. Clinton, saying her appeal boiled down to her gender. Frankly, if Hillary Clinton were a man, I don't think she would get 5% of the vote, Mr. Trump said. Mr. Trump had the more convincing performance on Tuesday. He swept all 5 primaries, winning landslides of more than 30 percentage points over his rivals, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Governor John Kasich of Ohio. His routes represented a breakthrough. He received more than half the vote in every state, after months of winning most primaries by only pluralities. The big night for Mr. Trump and Mrs. Clinton intensified the aura of inevitability around their nomination bids and created urgent new challenges for their rivals. More significant, it increased Mr. Trump's chances of avoiding a fight on the floor of the Republican convention in July and of claiming the nomination on the delegates' first ballot. When the boxer knocks out the other boxer, you don't have to wait around for a decision, he said boastfully at an election night appearance before supporters at Trump Tower in New York. He added, "As far as I'm concerned, it's over." Mr. Cruz and Mr. Kasich fared so poorly on Tuesday that together they were likely to win just 10 of the 118 bound delegates up for grabs. Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Delaware also went for Mr. Trump, who was on track to bring his total to about 950 of the 1,237 needed to clinch the nomination outright. Mr. Cruz is now under growing pressure to beat Mr. Trump in Indiana's primary next week, perhaps the last real chance the Stop Trump forces have to halt his march to the nomination. He and Mr. Kasich forged an alliance to thwart Mr. Trump in Indiana, but is yet to show signs of working. Even before polls closed in the East on Tuesday night, Mr. Cruz tried to preempt the rush of coverage about Mr. Trump's dominance. Tonight, this campaign moves back to more favorable terrain, Mr. Cruz told supporters in the Knightstown, Indiana gymnasium, where the high school basketball movie Hoosiers, about underdogs who triumph over big city rival, was filmed. On the Democratic side, Senator Bernie Sanders won only the primary in Rhode Island and fell further behind Mrs. Clinton in their race to amass 2,383 Democratic delegates to clinch the nomination. Clinton advisors predicted late Tuesday night that she was poised to net roughly 50 more pledged delegates than Mr. Sanders, out of 462 up for grabs, adding to her lead of about 240 going into the primaries. Clinton advisors said Tuesday's final delegate tally would reveal not if, but when Mrs. Clinton would win the nomination, either in early June, if she continues at her current pace, or as soon as the Kentucky and Oregon primaries on May 17th, if she does better than expected in the coming weeks, once her support for more than 500 superdelegates is included. Superdelegates could switch their votes at any point, but Mrs. Clinton's are widely considered to be staunch supporters. Mrs. Clinton predicted that she would return to Philadelphia this summer for the Democratic convention with the most votes and the most pledged delegates. She pledged to heal the party's wounds after a long nomination fight, telling Sanders supporters that there is much more that unites us than divides us. But she also looked past Mr. Sanders to take a swipe at Mr. Trump and his campaign motto, "Make America Great Again." Despite what other candidates say, we believe in the goodness of our people and the greatness of our nation, Mrs. Clinton said. Mr. Sanders, speaking Tuesday night to an audience of 6,500 people in West Virginia, which votes on May 10th, said emphatically that he would stay in the race. He made an unusually pointed appeal to superdelegates, arguing that he had won more votes for independents and from Republicans than Mrs. Clinton and would be a stronger general election candidate. After the rally, however, Mr. Sanders issues a statement saying he would go to the Democratic convention in July with as many delegates as possible to fight for a progressive party platform, a remark that some Democrats interpreted as his first acknowledgement that he would not attend the convention as a nominee. Still, for all his fortitude, Mr. Sanders plans to reassess his candidacy on Wednesday and decide whether to adjust his strategy if Mrs. Clinton's delegate lead appears all but insurmountable. His senior strategist, Tad Devine, said the Sanders team would discuss a range of issues, including how to adjust messaging about the nominating process and what route, if any, there is to winning it. Mr. Devine said he could still see a mathematical path to securing the nomination, but added that if it changed, the campaign would have to adjust. If we are sitting here and there's no sort of mathematical way to do it, we will be upfront about that, Mr. Devine said on Tuesday. The broad support for Mr. Trump spanned some of the dividing lines that have characterized the Republican race until now. He won among the affluent and college-educated as well as the blue-collar voters and those with no more than a high school education, according to exit polls. But the unease about Mr. Trump's candidacy in some quarters of the party persisted, a potential warning sign if he emerges as a nominee. About a quarter of Republican primary voters in Connecticut, Maryland, and Pennsylvania said they would not support him if he were the party's nominee. The resistance to Mr. Trump was greatest among Mr. Kasich supporters, who are more moderate-leaning. 6 in 10 said they would not vote for Mr. Trump in November. Mrs. Clinton was lifted once again by strong backing from blacks and older voters, but she also ran stronger with white voters than she has in many states. In Pennsylvania, she narrowly won among whites. Her performance was even better in Maryland, where she carried white voters by 12 points. Mr. Trump's advantage across all 5 states was so forbidding that Mr. Cruz abandoned the Northeast entirely on Saturday, and Mr. Kasich was left to pick up stray delegates. Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Sanders campaigned aggressively in Pennsylvania and Connecticut, but they focused largely on policy issues like fracking, gun control, and Wall Street reform rather than sniping at each other as they did in a raucous televised debate in Brooklyn. Not only did Mr. Trump have significant prospects for a substantial delegate haul Tuesday, a week after his dominating performance in New York, he also had the opportunity to send a clear message to party leaders and other Republicans that resistance to his nomination is futile. Mr. Trump's path toward a delegate majority becomes far clearer if Mr. Cruz is unable to beat him in Indiana. That is why Mr. Cruz left Pennsylvania on Saturday to head to Indiana, and he plans to campaign there as aggressively as he has anywhere since the Iowa caucuses, where he scored a surprise victory. The stakes for Mr. Cruz are so high that within political circles, speculation has been swirling this week that he would try to change the subject from his latest losses and announce his pick for vice president before the primary in Indiana. Advisors to Mr. Cruz were cagey about whether he would take such an extraordinary step in an effort to win Indiana, where polls last week put Mr. Trump ahead. But the advisors did not dismiss the possibility, an indication that they were thinking about such a move, wanted to keep the speculation alive, or both. But Mr. Trump has no intention of giving Mr. Cruz the opening in Indiana he so plainly needs. He planned a rally on Wednesday night in Indianapolis with a beloved figure in the state who has also been known to speak his mind and find controversy, that being Bobby Knight, the former Indiana University men's basketball coach. The two Democrats have also been eyeing Indiana, with Mrs. Clinton campaigning there on Tuesday. Mrs. Clinton narrowly beat Barack Obama in the Indiana primary in 2008, winning support from a sizable majority of white voters, who made up nearly 80% of the electorate in that primary, while Mr. Obama won nearly 90% of the black vote. In the 2016 primaries and caucuses, Mr. Sanders has often beaten Mrs. Clinton among white voters, especially white men, and he also performs well with independents, young people, and college students, all of whom were expected to be forces in Indiana. While our area has lost a lot of good-paying manufacturing jobs, and Senator Sanders has a way of tapping into that, I think Democrats are ready to rally around Mrs. Clinton and help her get ready to take on Trump and the Republicans, said Dennis Tyler, a Clinton backer who is mayor of Muncie, Indiana, in a county Mrs. Clinton carried 8 years ago. Sanders' advisors have been steadily optimistic about Indiana, but they also acknowledge that a victory there would not matter much if Mr. Sanders fell even further behind Mrs. Clinton in the race for delegates. If we do, said Mr. Devine, the senator's strategist, we may have to go back to the drawing board.
Thanks, Mike. And this is Connie, and I have the Lincoln Journal-Star in front of me. We're going to go ahead and start with the Nation in Brief column. From Rochester, New York, a 12-year-old Western New York girl has wound up running 10 extra miles after she got into the wrong road race. Lee Adanez Rodriguez had registered for the 5K race that was part of last Sunday's Rochester Regional Health Flower City Challenge. She thought she was arriving late at the starting line when the race started, so she began running with the rest of the runners. Turned out she was running with the half marathoners on the 13.1-mile course and not in the 5K or 3.1 miles. Rodriguez says she realized about halfway through she was in the wrong race, but decided to finish. She completed the half marathon in 2 hours, 43 minutes, and 31 seconds. Congress will not act to help debt-ridden Puerto Rico ahead of a May 1st deadline when nearly $500 million in bond payments come due, House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy said Tuesday. The California Republicans' admission to reporters amounted to a statement of the obvious, given that the deadline is days away and the House has failed so far even to get a bill out of committee. A more important deadline looms July 1st, when around $2 billion in principal and interest payments come due. McCarthy said he's hopeful a bipartisan bill could emerge from the House by then, though the Senate would still have to act. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Tuesday the Senate would let the House go first on the issue. Apple sold more than 51 million iPhones in the first 3 months of this year, and that's the problem. That's 10 million fewer iPhones than the tech giant sold during the same quarter a year ago. As a result, Apple on Tuesday reported its first drop in quarterly revenue in 13 years and the first ever year-over-year decline in iPhone sales. This slide is putting more pressure on Apple and CEO Tim Cook to come up with its next big product. Cook, of course, has problems many corporate bosses would kill to have. Despite the decline in sales, Apple managed to rack up $10.5 billion in profit for the quarter. And Kelly Ripa returned to her daytime talk show Tuesday after time off to gather her thoughts in response to learning her co-host Michael Strahan is leaving, saying the incident had started a conversation about workplace respect. She also told the audience that her bosses had apologized to her and she'd received assurances that the Live with Kelly and Michael show was important to parent Walt Disney Company. But only hours after the show's telecast, Ripa's remarks were upstaged by an updated announcement that Strahan will leave in May for full-time duties on ABC's Good Morning America, not in September as previously indicated. And Prince's sister believes the superstar musician didn't have a will and asked a Minnesota court on Tuesday to appoint a trust company to temporarily oversee his multi-million-dollar estate. Tyka Nelson, Prince's only full sibling, said in the court filing that immediate action was necessary to manage Prince's business interest following his death last week at Paisley Park, his famous home and recording studio complex in suburban Minneapolis. The documents don't estimate how much his estate may be worth, but Prince made hundreds of millions of dollars for record companies, concert venues, and others, and estimates of how much licensing his personal brand will generate after his death reached to the purple clouds. In just 3 days, the outpouring of grief and nostalgia after his death prompted fans to buy 2.3 million of his songs. Mike?
You, Connie. This from Paris. Europe struggles to manage those who return from ISIS. 10 young Muslim men, bored by a mundane life in France and haunted by a feeling of uselessness, as one put it, were seduced by a leading Islamic State recruiter in Europe in 2013. Within months, they were in Syria under the watchful eyes of hooded, Kalashnikov-wielding militants, doing push-ups, fiddling with weapons, and imbibing the ideology. But the harsh regimen, most have since told investigators, was not to their liking, and it was not long before they hastened back to their families in the Strasbourg area, where they were almost immediately picked up by the French authorities. What to do with hundreds, perhaps thousands, of such young men in Europe is now among the biggest challenges facing governments and security services. After the Paris and Brussels terror attacks, which were carried out in part by Europeans who had spent time in Syria with the Islamic State, France and other countries are grappling with how far to go in tightening laws to prosecute, monitor, and restrict the movements of returnees. At the heart of the debate is whether to take preemptive legal action against people who have not committed terrorist acts or even been implicated in a plot, but who have simply been to Syria and possibly received training in Islamic State camps. Several urgent factors have propelled the debate. The steeper risk of terrorist attacks, the fact that monitoring the sheer numbers who have returned is overwhelming security services, and the difficulty of building cases against suspects who may have been trained and indoctrinated in distant lands. At least 14 European countries have made receiving terrorism training a criminal offense. 9 have made travel to the war zones of Syria and Iraq an offense. In France, more than 900 people have left the country to be jihadists, making it Europe's biggest wellspring of foreign fighters. The government is now debating whether to allow house arrest, even if there are merely serious reasons for thinking that someone has been in an overseas war zone. 2 trials involving French jihadist cells were held in Paris this month, with the defendants in one of them receiving sentences of up to 10 years on charges of criminal conspiracy with the aim of preparing acts of terrorism. Setting policy for dealing with returning jihadists is just one example of how Europe, like the United States after the September 11th attacks, is being forced to weigh security concerns against civil liberties. Even before the Paris and Brussels assaults, cases like the one in Strasbourg were highlighting the difficult choices posed by European citizens coming home from Syria. At least 1,300 European jihadists have returned to the continent, and those are the only ones identified by the police. 3 times as many Europeans may have gone to Syria, some slipping back undetected with disastrous consequences. One member of the Strasbourg group, Fouad Muhammad Agad, returned after the others and was not detected by the authorities. He ended up as one of the 3 killers at the Bataclan concert hall in Paris, where 90 people were shot dead on November 13th. Of the 9 others from Strasbourg known to have gone to Syria, 2 were killed there in January of 2014, but 7 returned. They were quickly arrested in May of 2014 and now await trial. The record of their interrogations afterward is a dance of denial that they intended any harm in Europe. This is a radical extremist Islam, which has nothing to do with basic Islam, and which I disavow, Fayyoud's brother Karim told investigators, according to documents recounting the interrogations. There's no policy covering all of Europe, and in some instances, the returning jihadists are not immediately blocked up. Though they are almost always placed under some form of monitoring, this puts a big strain on the police and intelligence services. 15 to 20 officers per jihadist are required for constant surveillance, said Magnus Ranstorp of the National Defense College in Sweden, a country where about 80 have returned. In Belgium, the biggest per capita furnisher of jihadists is the European Union. 50 to 120 have returned. But after the recent attacks and with the Islamic State promising more terrorist strikes, a period of relative laxity is over, analysts said. They will be arrested and the evidence will be gathered, said Edwin Bakker, director of the Center for Terrorism and Counterterrorism at Leiden University in the Netherlands. More prosecutions are being undertaken preventatively, even when there is little firm evidence of a plot, as the French examples show. But the Strasbourg cases illustrate the difficulties of building a prosecution. The Strasbourg group, all men in their mid to late 20s, have met in hookah bars and fast food joints. They included a delivery driver, a service station attendant, a physical education instructor, several who were unemployed, and a petty criminal. Their departure for Syria in December 2013 had been well publicized. So when they returned from February to April 2014, France's internal security agency, the DGSI, knew whom to look for and where. After their return, the investigators listened and watched, finally pouncing on May 13, 2014, in the same working-class neighborhood they had left. In the eyes of the authorities, their crime was simple: being enlisted by a well-known French recruiter, traveling to Syria and Islamic State safe houses or training centers, training with Kalashnikov rifles and other weapons, and returning to France. Yet in their interrogations, none of the men admitted wrongdoing, and several insisted that they had gone to Syria for humanitarian reasons. The men now claim to reject Islamic State ideology and tactics and profess regret for their stupidities, as one put it under questioning. But investigators are well aware that Islamic State training manuals urge recruits to practice the art of taqiyya, or concealment. One suspect in Strasbourg, Mohammed Hatteh, went through 5 interrogation sessions before admitting he had even been to Syria. As a result, the authorities tried to find evidence from mobile phones, social media posts, and other sources that shed light on motivations and true intentions. We know sometimes people try to suggest they are disillusioned, but they are just hiding it, said Gilles de Kirchhoff, the European Union's counterterrorism coordinator. When we intercept their communication, we discover it is not true, he said. The 7 Strasbourg suspects portray themselves as full of regret for having made the trip to Syria. I wasn't brought up with that type of thinking, and I am totally against it, one of the men, Milud Malmi, told interrogators in 2014. When I was there, they kept me isolated, and they made me undergo truly abominable things, Mr. Malmi said. I want to turn the page. Another of them, Ratiyan Tahar, said, once I got there, I understood very quickly what a mess I had gotten myself into, and that I had fallen in with a bunch of madmen. Even escaping was a risk, Karim Muhammad Agad said. Each one of us, we had to play games in order to flee the country, because our lives were in danger, he said. Yet, investigators said they had found photographs on Facebook, phones, and computers showing that some of the men posing with the Islamic State flag were wearing military gear and holding rifles. There were also photographs of decapitated corpses, the investigators said. In addition, all had been recruited in France by Mourad Fariz, who said in 2014 that he was the principal recruiter for jihadists in France. He met Mr. Malmi at a McDonald's in Kiel, Germany, across the river from Strasbourg. All the jihadists of the newspapers are talking about, they passed through me, Mr. Fries told Vice from Syria. Now Mr. Faraz is now in jail in France. It is difficult to tell from the mostly bland answers in the transcripts how radicalized the suspects became, though the investigators were able to catch them in inconsistencies and evasions. This interrogation contradicts the 2 preceding it, there being no place in this part of the story for humanitarianism, the investigators noted in their summary of statements by Ali Hatteh, another suspect. Liberal-minded French jurists have criticized what they call the criminalizing of intentions, but France remains under a state of emergency after the November 13th attacks. The people that return now, they will probably be hunted down, said Mr. Bacher of the Center for Terrorism and Counterterrorism. The general approach is really to try to convict these people, he added. In the past, there was the attitude, let it go, but we've really gone beyond that.
I'm going to move on to the front page of the Lincoln Journal-Star and start with this article. The church is more than a building. 9 years ago, the Reverend Stu Kearns comforted his Zion Presbyterian congregation with those words after fire gutted the historic church at 9th and D Streets. Tuesday, Kearns repeated them when a 3-alarm fire damaged Zion's relatively new home at 27th Street and Old Cheney Road. It's the most ridiculously insane, unreal, it's surreal, he said, shaking his head, as firefighters poked around the roof of what had been the church's kitchen and fellowship area. Tuesday's fire at 5511 South 27th Street was called in just before 10 a.m. by office manager Lynn Locklear. I heard a crackling sound, she said. I thought it might be the roof leaking. But as she walked down the hall, she saw flames shooting from the stove area of the kitchen. Right away, I called 911. They were that big, said Locklear, who alerted construction crews working in another part of the building. Everyone got out safely. We're 2 for 2 with safety, said longtime congregation member Jen Gillette, who watched from across the parking lot. It's just a building. But 2 fires, 8 years, 10 months, and 17 days apart, both originating in the kitchen, both happening as the church celebrated building expansions. It seems really unfair, said Kearns, who was out running in preparation for his 5th and perhaps final half marathon when Locklear called. It seems almost impossible, he said. It seems like it would have to be a mistake. Firefighters initially tried to attack the fire through the east side of the church, but encountered heavy heat and smoke, Battalion Chief Jim Bopp said. Then they tried a north entrance, but smoke and heat were too dangerous there as well, he said. Crews cut a hole in the roof to ventilate and allow firefighters to get deeper inside the building and knock down the fire, Bopp said. LFR called the fire under control at noon, but continued to look for and fight hot spots into the afternoon. Smoke spread throughout the church, Bopp said. As soon as it came in, we all thought, this is incredible. What bad luck for these folks, Bopp said. Most of the damage is concentrated in the kitchen area, which is on the north side of the building and is the oldest part of the structure, built in 1971. The exact cause and total damage to the building, valued at almost $1.2 million, are under investigation. Because of Tuesday night storms, fire investigators plan to go back inside and assess the damage Wednesday morning. Zion's former home at 9th and D Streets was a building constructed in 1927 by German-Russian immigrants. Fire broke out on June 9, 2007, one day before the church was to break ground on a $1.1 million education wing. 10 days ago, Zion dedicated its new 8,000 square foot education wing and mini gymnasium. The wing was the only part of the church equipped with fire doors and a sprinkler system, which worked perfectly on Tuesday, Kearns said. This is bad, but it seems to have been contained. I am certain we can return to this site. By day's end, Kearns had a chance to walk through part of the church. The sanctuary and its Bendiant pipe organ, which replaced the historic pipe organ lost in the 2007 fire, were unscathed other than smoke damage, he said. Early assessments indicate the fire caused no structural damage, Kearns said, but his hope to hold Sunday services in the church this week were dashed when he learned that the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives will be coming to investigate. Since 1996, the ATF has been charged with investigating the origin of all reported fires at houses of worship. So it may be weeks or even months before Zion members can return home, Kearns said. In the meantime, the Catholic Diocese of Lincoln has offered the Presbyterian Church its chapel at Blessed John 23rd Center, 3700 Sheridan Boulevard. The Zion Presbyterian will hold a prayer meeting at the Sheridan Boulevard Church at 7 p.m. Wednesday. Sunday services there will begin May 8th. This Sunday, the church will have a joint service at 10:30 with Christ Chapel at 48th and Prescott. Kearns praised the diocese and other churches for their gracious offers of help. His congregation, he said, will charge ahead. Buildings come and go, Kern said. I've been telling people for the last 9 years, this is a disruption. It doesn't stop our mission. Longtime church member Leah Noel said when the church moved to 27th and Old Cheney, members often joke they'd be safe because LFR has a station just across the street. Still, as she and other congregation members watched on Tuesday, the mood was far different from 2007 when only a few bricks remained standing. We'll get right back in there, Noel said. God has a bigger picture, so we're just trusting him.
Thank you, Connie. This again from the New York Times. At Chobani, it's not just the yogurt that's rich. From New Berlin, New York. The 2,000 full-time employees of the yogurt company Chobani were handed quite the surprise on Tuesday, an ownership stake that could make some of them millionaires. Hamdi Ulukaya, the Turkish immigrant who founded Chobani in 2005, told workers at the company's plant here in upstate New York that he would be giving them shares worth up to 10% of the company when it goes public or is sold. The goal, he said, is to pass along the wealth they have helped build in the decades since the company started. Chobani is now widely considered to be worth several $billion. I built something I never thought would be such a success, but I cannot think of Chobani being built without all of these people, Mr. Ulukaya said. Now they'll be working to build the company even more and building their future at the same time, he said. Chobani employees received the news on Tuesday morning. Each worker received a white packet. Inside was information about how many Chobani shares they were given. The number of shares given to each person is based on tenure, so the longer an employee has been at the company, the bigger the stake. 2 years ago, when Chobani received a loan from TPG Capital, a private equity firm, the company's value was estimated at between $3 billion and $5 billion. At the $3 billion valuation, the average employee payout would be $150,000. The earliest employees, though, would most likely be given many more shares, possibly worth over $1 million. Rich Lake, lead project manager, was one of the original group of 5 employees Mr. Ulukaya hired for the plant in New Berlin. Mr. Lake said on Tuesday that he did not expect Chobani shares to change his life much. I'm not one for living outside my means, he said. Rather, he said, the shares are an acknowledgement of what he and the other employees have put into Chobani. It's better than a bonus or a raise, Mr. Lake said. It's the best thing because you're getting a piece of this thing you helped build. The transfer of money by Mr. Ulukaya touches on a hot-button economic issue, the rapidly expanding gap in pay between executives and average workers. The United States has one of the widest pay gaps, and the topic has played a prominent role in this year's presidential race, particularly among Democrats. Some other executives have also taken this issue on themselves. A founder of Gravity Payments, a Seattle-based credit card payment processing firm, last year promised to pay a minimum wage of $70,000 to his 120-person staff within 3 years. The shares given to Chobani employees are coming directly from Mr. Ulukaya. The shares can be sold if the company goes public or is bought by another business, neither of which seems imminent. Employees can hang on to the shares if they leave or retire, or the company will buy them back. The unusual announcement comes from TPG Capital, whose $750 million loan helped bail out Chobani, can buy a stake in the company. Tension between Mr. Ulukaya and TPG about the direction of the company emerged shortly after the loan deal. TPG has warrants to buy 20% or more of Chobani's shares, depending on targets set in the original deal it struck. But that percentage would now be calculated from the 90% of the remaining shares after the 10% given to the employees, essentially diluting TPG's potential stake. TPG declined to comment on Tuesday. In addition, a year ago, Mr. Ulukaya settled a lawsuit with his ex-wife, who had sought a stake in the company. The terms of the settlement were not released. This sort of transfer of shares to employees is rare in the food industry. In one of the few notable examples, Bob Moore, the founder of Bob's Red Mill, a grains and cereals company, handed control of the company to its employees in 2010 with the creation of an employee stock ownership program. Technology startups often pay employees partly in shares to help recruit them or to compete in a company's early days for in-demand workers. Early employees of Google and Facebook became overnight multimillionaires thanks to such compensation. But unlike most of those tech companies, Mr. Ulukaya is giving his employees a piece of the company after its value is firmly established. Mr. Ulukaya has played a hands-on role in the company since 2005, when he bought a defunct Kraft yogurt plant here with $800,000 in loans from the Small Business Administration. 2 years later, he began selling Greek yogurt, setting off a heated competition on what had been one of the sleepier refrigerated cases in grocery stores. Chobani pays employees above the minimum wage and offers full-time employees health benefits and other benefits. Early on, Mr. Ulukaya established a 401k plan for employees and pushed them to participate. I preached and nagged and tried to force them to do it, he said. Unfortunately, not all did, and I've continued to worry about them in retirement. A few years ago, though, the company ran into financial problems after spending almost $500 million to build the largest yogurt processing plant in the world, a 1 million square foot facility in Idaho. The new plant allowed the company to expand into new products, like a children's yogurt packed in a tube and tiny cups of dessert-like yogurts. But the company struggled to get lines up and running smoothly, and public health officials identified mold contamination in some of the products. It was a wake-up call for us, Mr. Ulukaya said soberly. It made me realize that I needed to get this right, and so I'm glad it happened. The company had to close lines and invest in improving its food safety regimens. It also took the loan from TPG Capital to help build operations better suited to the billion-dollar business Chobani had become. In a presentation to investors, though, TPG boasted about how it had waited until the last minute to come to Chobani's rescue with the loan, thus allowing it to negotiate better terms in a deal that it estimated could increase the company's value to as much as $7 billion. In addition, rumors circulated that TPG wanted to replace Mr. Ulukaya with a new chief executive, which rankled him. But in the last year or so, business has rebounded, thanks in large part to new products made at the Idaho plant. Mr. Ulukaya will still own the vast majority of the company, though his fortune will be diluted as well. He said that giving his employees a stake in the company's success was among the terms he demanded when the deal with TPG was struck. To me, there are two kinds of people in this world, he said on Tuesday, the people who work at Chobani and the people who don't.
That's a great story. And on the Lincoln page, the local page, the new mayor of Piedmont showed up with an entourage to give her acceptance speech Tuesday. Emily Holler and the St. Teresa Catholic School Student Council smiled and waved, Emily in a teal dress and a green sash, proclaiming her political status. The teacher will serve a one-year term. She virtually had no votes before Friday, said Brian Wallingford, election commissioner and marketing director for the Piedmont shops. So yeah, it's pretty incredible that she won. Piedmont's first election was the brainchild of Wallingford and Steve Glenn, owner of the shopping center. The creative duo saw it as a way to raise money for nonprofits, market the shopping center, and add levity to an uncivil election cycle. We're not hiding the fact that this election is one that can be bought, Glenn said. Glenn declared at the start of the facetious campaign, as every penny put in candidates' jars is equal to one vote. Holler received 48,342 votes, or $483.42, including an anonymous $200 donation. Mayoral candidates were required to live or work in a designated parameter around Piedmont, and votes were cast via mason jars placed in 4 retail polling places. Half of the $1,283 raised by the 10 wannabe mayors will go to Holer's School for renovations, and the other half to the Bryan Foundation's Community Caring Fund. The election season was brief. Candidates campaigned hard and hardly at all, staking out positions on no issues whatsoever and explaining their platforms in sound bites such as "a chicken in every pot" and "no other candidate can grow a beard like me." Holer will enjoy the perks of her unpaid position, which include a reserved parking space, a key to the city, and free admission to shopping center events, including an upcoming wine festival. The mayor squealed upon hearing the news, and while she did not promise to make Piedmont great, the campaign slogan of a losing candidate, she did make a vow to wear a sash and wear it proudly.
Connie, again from the New York Times. Newtown conspiracy theorist sues university that dismissed him. Professor who gained notoriety by questioning whether the elementary school massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, and other bloody crimes are hoaxes perpetrated by the government has sued a Florida university for firing him, saying that he was targeted for exercising his right to free speech. The professor, James Tracy, filed suit on Monday in federal district court against Florida Atlantic University, where he taught for 13 years, and United Faculty of Florida, the union that had represented him. The university, a state institution based in Boca Raton, dismissed Mr. Tracy in January from his tenured position as an associate professor of communications for failing to submit forms documenting the work he did outside the university. It was that work, writing for an alternative news site and for his blog, that drew attention to Mr. Tracy and led to pressure to oust him after the December 14th, 2012 shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, in which 20 first graders and 6 adults were killed. He wrote, "One is left to inquire whether the Sandy Hook shooting ever took place, at least in the way law enforcement authorities and the nation's news media have described." He asserted that evidence of multiple gunmen had been suppressed and that parents seen outside the school might have been trained actors working under the direction of state and federal authorities. In his suit, Mr. Tracy accused Florida Atlantic of violating his right to free speech and retaliating against him for exercising that right. He also claimed that the union had colluded with the university to deny him due process. The university said it would not comment, and the union did not reply to messages. The suit contends that the university's requirement to declare outside activities is unconstitutionally overbroad and vague, and impermissibly restricts faculty expression and freedom of speech. Mr. Tracy's writings about Newtown drew particular attention and scorn from around the country, and he contends bullying and harassment, including by his fellow faculty members. But he has made similar allegations about events like the mass shooting in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado in 2012, the Washington Navy Yard shooting and the Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, and the massacre at a holiday meeting in December in San Bernardino, California. He suggested that the Obama administration had staged them to promote its gun control agenda. Florida Atlantic disciplined Mr. Tracy in 2013, saying that he had not taken enough care to distance those views from the university. Some academic and free speech groups came to his defense, saying that he had a right to unorthodox or offensive views. The furor flared again in December when Lenny and Veronica Posner, the parents of Noah Posner, who was 6 when he was killed at Newtown, wrote an opinion piece in the Sun Sentinel, a Florida newspaper. In it, they wrote that Mr. Tracy had demanded that they prove that Noah ever existed, that they were his parents, and that they owned the rights to photographs of him. The professor, they said, personally sought to cause our family pain and anguish. Last fall, Mr. Tracy, a former president of the faculty union, protested the university's requirement that he fill out a long form listing his outside work, whether paid or unpaid. He said that the disclosure rule should not apply to unpaid work like his controversial writings, and that they did not reflect on his scholarly work. The university gave him a deadline to file 3 years' worth of disclosure forms, and the union advised him to comply and then challenge the policy. He filed the paperwork a day late. The university dismissed him in January, citing the disclosure issue and saying that he had once again failed to fully separate his views from his role at Florida Atlantic.
In the At a Glance column, a 25-year-old Lincoln man has been connected to 4 burglaries totaling more than $27,000 over the course of 8 months. Lancaster County Sheriff's deputies arrested Joshua Van Housen Friday on suspicion of stealing Dodge Viper car parts from outside a home near 98th and A Streets on July 9th of last year, February 17th, February 19th, and March 13th, according to court documents. During the investigation, several items matching the description of those stolen were listed on sales websites under the name Harry Smeagol. Documents say investigators responded to the seller's post and talked to a man later identified as Van Housen. An undercover officer then bought the parts from Van Housen after surveillance showed him removing the parts from his apartment prior to the sale. Van Housen was arrested on suspicion of burglary. And Omaha police say a man returning from work found his 6-month-old child unconscious in a bathtub. Officers were sent to Creighton University Medical Center around 11:45 p.m. Sunday to investigate because the child had been taken there in a private vehicle. Police said the infant later was taken to Children's Hospital and Medical Center and is on life support there. The father told officers that while he was at work, the infant and a 2-year-old were under the care of a woman. Police said she was taken into custody on suspicion of child abuse or neglect. A 48-year-old motorcyclist has been killed in an Omaha collision with a pickup. Omaha police said the accident occurred a little before 7 p.m. Monday when the westbound pickup didn't halt at a stop sign and collided with the northbound motorcycle. The impact knocked the motorcycle into another pickup that was parked nearby, and both caught fire. Police said Daniel McDonald of Omaha was pronounced dead at the scene. His passenger was taken to a hospital. The pickup driver didn't report any injuries. He was arrested on suspicion of vehicular homicide. A 62-year-old man was washing his car in the 5500 block of Northwest Tudor Lane Saturday afternoon when he was shot by an airsoft BB pellet. The man said he felt a sting on the back of his right forearm and thought he'd been stung by a wasp, Lincoln police officer Katie Flood said Monday. He then realized he'd been hit by a BB and noticed an older dark green sedan with 3 or 4 people inside drive by, Flood said. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Lincoln Police Department at 441-6000. A 77-year-old Lincoln woman was conned out of $8,000 in a phone scam by someone claiming to be a Las Vegas police officer who demanded iTunes cards to pay for her relatives' legal fees, Lincoln police said. The caller claimed to be someone helping her relative who had crashed a rental car, and that for the relatives to go home, the police officer would need the iTunes cards, Captain Bob Farber said. The woman bought the cards, and then when the scammers called back, she read the redemption codes on the cards over the phone. And later call, the scammer claimed additional iTunes cards were needed to cover jury fees. Police did not have any suspects Monday night. A shotgun was stolen from a home in the 5500 block of Sherman Street over the weekend, Lincoln police said. The resident was away from the home, but a neighbor saw the back door was open and went to close it and saw that it had been kicked in. The door leading from the garage to inside the home had also been kicked open, police said. A 12-gauge shotgun and laptop were taken. Anyone with information is asked to contact Lincoln Police at 402-441-6000. And the final piece in the At a Glance column is from Beatrice. A May 5th deadline has been set for applications to fill a vacancy left by the retirement of Gage County District Judge Paul Korsland. The Judicial Nominating Commission will hold a public hearing May 26th in the Gage County Courthouse and will receive information on the qualifications of candidates to fill the vacancy in the 1st Judicial District. Besides Gage County, the 1st District consists of Clay, Fillmore, Jefferson, Johnson, Nemaha, Nichols, Pawnee, Richardson, Saline, Thayer, counties, and the primary place of office for the judicial vacancy is Beatrice. The hearing is open to the public, and the public is welcome to present information concerning candidates for the judicial opening. Mike?
Thank you, Connie. We'll now move on to the obituaries from the Omaha World Herald. Arenas, Bridget D. Arenas, 64 years old. Visitation on Thursday at 4 p.m. Wake service and funeral at St. Francis Cabrini Catholic Church. Blomstrand, Robert Nels Bob Blomstrand, a United States veteran, age 89 years old. Brown, Nancy Grass Brown, 63 years old. Memorial gathering Thursday at Happy Hollow Club. In lieu of flowers, memorials to disabled American veterans. Bryant, Donald Robert Bryant, 81 years old. Funeral services by West Lawn Hillcrest Funeral Home. Chitil, Joseph Frank Sonny Chitil III, 69 years old, United States Army veteran. Visitation on Thursday and wake at Holy Cross Catholic Church. Clifton, Mary A. Clifton, 80 years old. Burial and services on Thursday at St. Elizabeth and Seton Church. Edick, Lila L. Edick, 90 years old. Complete notice will be later, but handled by Heafy Hoffman and Dwork. Gore, Norman S. Bud Gore, age 72. Funeral Thursday, 9:30 a.m. at Bethany Chapel to St. Mary's Church for Mass of Christian burial. Grant, Emerine Yellow Wolf Grant, age 81, of Omaha. Celebration of Emerine's life be Friday, April 29th at the Brahmin Mortuary, 72nd Street Chapel. Hanner, Sue Ann Hanner, 79 years old. Graveside service, 11 a.m. Friday at Evergreen Memorial Park. Hurt, Jean Hurt, 77 years old. Wake service on Thursday at 7 p.m. at St. Gerald Lakeview Chapel in Omaha. James, Anita James, 84 years old. Funeral service 1 p.m. on Friday, April 29th at Morning Star Baptist Church. Coons, Joan E. Coons, 92 years old. Graveside services held on Wednesday. Coons, Roland Coons, age 77. Complete notice later. Funeral arrangements by Johnny Gentleman. Lahoda, Mabel L. Lahoda, 85 years old. Visitation will be Wednesday, April 27th at Reeder Mortuary, Ames Chapel. Lee, Mary Virginia Lee, 80 years old. Memorials to Holy Cross Catholic Church. Visitation on Wednesday at Holy Cross Catholic Church from 4 to 5. Lorenz, Jean Curtis Lorenz, 91 years old. Private family burial. McElhaney, Larry Dale McElhaney, age 53, United States Air Force veteran. Celebration of Larry's life will be held on Friday, April 29th at the LifeSpring Church in Bellevue. Maloney, Virginia M. Maloney, 91 years old. Private services were held. O'Daniel, Elizabeth M. O'Daniel, 98 years old. Family will receive friends Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 p.m. at Christ the King Catholic Church. Odin, Kevin Paul Odin, United States Army veteran. Visitation from 11 to 12 p.m. at Good Shepherd Funeral Home with honor guard by the American Legion. Peets, Marie Frances Peets, 83 years old. Celebration of Marie's life, Thursday, April 28th, at the Brahman Mortuary. Peters, Kenneth C. Peters, 78 years old, United States veteran. Gathering of family and friends will be Friday, April 29th at Brahman Mortuary. Protaski, Philip W. Protaski, 86 years old, also a United States veteran. Funeral Thursday at the Carisco Larkin Staskowitz Chapel. Scarpello, Sam M. Scarpello, 82 years old, United States veteran. Family received friends on Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. at the mortuary of Heaphy Hoffman. Shellhace, Marilyn R. Shellhace, 91 years old. Memorial service Friday, April 29th at St. Matthew Lutheran Church. Sites, Patricia D. Sites, 64 years old. Visitation Thursday from 4 to 6 at the Johnny Gentleman Chapel. Strickland, Andrew J. Strickland Jr., 61 years old. Services on Friday at Forest Lawn Funeral Home. Vasicek, Scott O. Vasicek, 54 years old, of Bellevue. Funeral service 1 p.m. Friday at Cutler O'Neill Meyer Woodring, Bayless Park Chapel. Warren, Donald Zane Warren, age 89, also a U.S. veteran. Visitation will be Thursday from 5 to 7 at the Bethany Funeral Home. Wetherill, Michael J. Wetherill, age 57, of Harlan, Iowa. Visitation will begin at 10 a.m. on Friday, a memorial service starting at 11 at Hoy Kilnosky Funeral Home. Witt, Tillman L. Witt, age 74, of Council Bluffs. Visitation will be on Thursday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Cutler O'Neill Meyer Woodring Funeral Home in Council Bluffs. And finally, Williams, Max Randall Williams. Graveside services will be 11 a.m. Saturday, April 30th at Evergreen Memorial Park in Omaha.
And the obituaries for the Lincoln Journal-Star start with Balderson. Lloyd H. Balderson, 91, of Portland. Harmon Wright Mortuary in Beatrice is in charge. Blayhock, Joseph Joe Philip Blayhock, 65, of Lincoln. Memorials can be directed to Nebraska Children's Home Society, Seostris Shrine, Scotus Central High School, or Teammates. Roper and Sons is in charge of services. Bundy, Amanda J. Bundy, 29, of Lincoln, Metcalf Funeral Home, in charge of services. Butcher, Michael Butcher. Take a moment to hug your spouse, child, parent, or those who are special to you in lieu of flowers or donations. Buthris Mazer-in-Law Funeral Home, in charge of services. Klopek, Shirley Klopek, 89, of Lincoln, in lieu of flowers, family request memorials to the First Lutheran Church of Lincoln. Coons, Jean D. Coons, 92, of Lincoln. Memorials to the family for future designation. Lincoln Memorial Funeral Home, in charge of services. Arisman, Kelly Arisman, 53, of Lincoln. Buthris Mays Love Funeral Home, in charge of services, and memorials are suggested to the family for designation at a later time. Fisher, Carl Fisher, 92. Let's see, in lieu of flowers, memorials to Matt Talbot Kitchen and Outreach, St. Teresa's Building Fund, or Tabitha Hospice. Haug, Genevieve Rose Haug, 95, of Lincoln. Memorials to the staff at the Arbors or the staff of Hospice Community Care of Nebraska. Roper and Sons, in charge of services. Hyatt, Ruby Robbie Grace Hyatt, 83. Let's see, memorials are suggested to St. Jude's Research Hospital and Kerr Brothers Funeral Home in Lexington, Kentucky, in charge of services. Luttrell, Helen L. Luttrell, 99 of Lincoln. Memorials to New Covenant Community Church in Lincoln, Lincoln Family Funeral Home in charge of services. Payne, Dustin A. Payne, 21, Volks Funeral Home in Seward in charge of services. Ostrander, Diane S. Ostrander, 65 of Eagle, memorials to the family for future designation. Lincoln Memorial Park Cemetery is handling arrangements. Phelps, Ruby Rose Stouffer Phelps, 91, Good Shepherd Funeral Home in charge of services. Roland, James Roland, 54. Roth, Annette Ann Sutton Roth, 76. Wyuka Funeral Home in Lincoln in charge of services. Schutz, Dr. Wilfred M. Schutz, 86. In lieu of flowers, the family suggests memorials to Messiah Lutheran Church, Lutheran Hour Ministries, or Haiti Lutheran Mission Society, Buthras Mazer and Love Funeral Home in charge of services. Schambarger, Charles Lewis Schambarger, 70 of Lincoln. In lieu of flowers, please consider a donation to the nursing scholarship established at St. Elizabeth's Hospital. Schambarger Scholarship in the memo line of any checks, or the National Geographic Society. Shikoski, Helen R. Shikoski, 88 of Loop City. Memorials are suggested to the Shikoski family or Donor's Choice. Higgins Funeral Home in Loop City is in charge of arrangements. Squires, Cliff L. Squires, 89 of Lincoln. Memorials to the family for future designation. Roper and Sons Funeral Home in charge of services. Tuxhorn, Helen A. Tuxhorn, 94 of Auburn. Memorials to the Auburn Rescue Squad or Holy Cross Cemetery. Hemmingson Funeral Home in Auburn in charge of services. Woodburn, Phil Allen Woodburn, 60 of Wahoo. Memorials to Utan Public Schools Foundation Scholarship Fund, Roper and Sons Funeral Services in charge. Workman, Marilyn M. Workman, 73 from Mission, Texas. Zimmerman, Laureen Melusina, Anna Marie Zimmerman, 95 Beatrice. Listeners' memorials to the Radio Talking Book Network are tax deductible and will go a long way in keeping Radio Talking Book on the air. Please keep Radio Talking Book in mind when memorials are listed as Donor's Choice or your favorite charity. Donations should be sent to Radio Talking Book Network, 7101 Newport Avenue, Suite 205, Omaha, Nebraska, 68152. Thank you for being a Radio Talking Book Network listener and supporter. Emily?
All right, that brings us to our break, and we'll use one on that, and then we'll be right back to my reading for you. Hello, everyone. Dan Johnson here, and I want to invite everybody out to the Westfield Mall Saturday, April the 30th, for a resource fair. This will be running from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I will be doing a live broadcast for Radio Talking Book of Nebraska at the mall on that day. There will be 21 vendors, different vendors out there with resources and information that can help each and every one of us, blind and visually impaired persons. A few of the vendors that will be out there will be the Outlook Nebraska Industries, ONI, the NFB, which is the National Federation of the Blind, the ACB, and the American Nebraska, the OCB, the Omaha Council of the Blind, also the Eastern Nebraska on Aging will be there for any questions that you may have. Pat Fisher will be there with his resources and information that his company would be able to help you with. And most of all, Radio Talking Book of Nebraska will be there. And I will be broadcasting live from 9 a.m. until 10 a.m. Again, this will be on Saturday, April the 30th at West Rose Mall in front of Von Myers. And it will be on the inside of the mall area. If you can, come on out, listen to our broadcast. We just may entice you to head right on down. And I know that you will be enjoying just getting together and finding out all of the new information and all of the resources that are out there now for the blind and visually impaired. Come on down here, have a good time with us. Also, I do want to tell everybody that during this time of 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., I will be followed with a cameraman, and we will be going on YouTube with this. Come on out, enjoy yourself, get some great information from fantastic people that's out there to help us. Hope to see everyone there. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of your break. I want you to remember that this is your Radio Talking Book Network, your print information network, serving Nebraska and its neighboring states. The Radio Talking Book Network is brought to you with cooperation from KIOSF in Omaha and statewide through the NET Radio Network. Well, that brings us to the end of your break, and that means we're going back into your live reading. So I'm going to hand it on over to your readers in the studio, and then I'm going to get right back onto your live reading for you.
Thanks, Emily. We'll move on to the editorials. First from New York Times. Mexico runs away from the truth. In December 2014, President Enrique Peña Nieto of Mexico traveled to the state of Guerrero, where months earlier, 43 college students who were headed to a protest in Mexico City had vanished under murky circumstances and were presumed to have been massacred. Let's overcome this phase and take a step forward, Mr. Peña Nieto said then. He must have been deluded in thinking that he could turn the page on a human rights atrocity that outraged a nation when the government had no answers about who committed the crime and why. Weeks earlier, bowing to street protests and international condemnation, Mr. Peña Nieto had agreed to allow a team of international experts appointed by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to investigate the students' disappearance in collaboration with the government. As the experts interviewed witnesses and analyzed forensic evidence, they uncovered information about abductions of the students carried out on September 26th and 27th that conflicted with the version of events that the Mexican government issued in January 2015 as the historical truth. That version, delivered by Jesus Murillo Caram, then the Attorney General, said the students had been incinerated at a garbage dump after being abducted by local police officers working in concert with the Guerreros Unidos drug cartel. However, this past September, the international experts released a report saying that witnesses reported having seen federal police officials and military personnel at the site of the abduction. Their investigation also ruled out that there had been a fire large enough to burn 43 bodies at a garbage dump. Instead of acknowledging the significance of those findings, the Mexican government stonewalled requests for information and access to key witnesses. With disparaging articles about two of the investigators, Claudia Paz y Paz, the former Attorney General of Guatemala, and Ángela Buitrago, a former Colombian prosecutor, appeared in the Mexican press. The team reasonably interpreted them as a smear campaign carried out with the blessing of a government whose credibility they had undermined. The team's second and final report, which was released on Sunday, does not conclusively establish what happened to the students, but it's impossible not to interpret it as an indictment of Mexico's notoriously corrupt and often brutal justice system. The report, for instance, says the government's version of events was based on the accounts of witnesses who were tortured. It faults Mexican investigators for failing to explore leads and for refusing to amend prior findings in the face of new evidence. The government's conduct fueled widespread speculation that federal officials played a role in the crime and later sought to cover their tracks. The experts outlined their findings during a news conference on Sunday in Mexico City before leaving the country. Their mandate to investigate is expiring, and the government has said it will not renew it. Relatives of the victims in attendance chanted, "Don't leave, don't leave." No Mexican officials bothered to show up. That spoke volumes about the government's lack of political will to reform judicial institutions and its callousness toward its citizens.
Let's take a look at the letters to the editor in the Lincoln Journal-Star. It's good to see Ricketts standing against the redistricting bill. The process he describes that a citizens commission would be highly likely to be composed of party insiders who know how to draw districts to favor their friends and political allies is exactly what happens time and time again. This is why Republicans and Democrats win the same seats every year, in addition to people's fear of voting for an evil they know versus the new guy running against the incumbent. This process is something Nebraskans in a whole should be very interested in. It decides how powerful your vote is because if you vote Democrat in a Republican-drawn district, odds are your vote will get overtaken by the winner-takes-all districting, and this also works the other way as well. If Nebraskans want our legislature to actually get things done the way we vote, we need to crack the redistricting process and that decides who will be nominated and when 4 years after each census. And that's from Tyler Blackenhorn in Lincoln. It is very unfair for state senators and officials to blame Department of Correction Services Director Scott Frakes for all the problems in Nebraska's prison system. He has been on the job for only 14 months and inherited a huge mess, none of which was his doing. The system is currently at 165% of capacity. What did you expect? The blame correctly and directly belongs to former governors and state senators who did absolutely nothing for many, many years. And that's from David Rogers in Pawnee City. And the last one is from Jake Jacoby of Lincoln. It says a recent column, Why I Snapped at a Bernie Supporter April 17th, reminds me of a couple of cousins, both Trump supporters who, like Mr. Tom Purcell, seem to be very well informed about the personal lives of Bernie Sanders supporters. Mr. Purcell writes about the skinny, frumpy 20-something holding a Bernie Sanders sign whom he encountered on the street recently. Because the kid was out showing his support for Sanders in the middle of a workday, Purcell draws the conclusion that this particular kid didn't work and didn't have a job. He then further assumes that he's looking for a handout. It couldn't possibly be that this guy has a job at which he works the night shift and was so energized by the Sanders campaign that he chose to use part of his limited sleep time to go out and work for the candidate in whom he believes. Mr. Purcell sees a lazy Bernie supporter. I see a person out on the street showing us how democracy is supposed to happen. It's this kind of blind, uninformed perception that feeds the hatred dividing this country. Faithful to this mindset, he leaves us with a threatening, shut your yap, should you be holding a Bernie sign and you encounter him on the sidewalk. He's in no mood.
Thanks, Connie. And a few letters to the editor in New York. First of all, from John Stafford of Rye, New York. Limiting bankers' bonuses. To the editor, after wrecking the economy and continuing to pay themselves multi-million-dollar bonuses, top Wall Street executives finally being held accountable. After 6 years, a plan targets Wall Street pay. And this Thanks, Bernie. You may have lost the New York primary and trail in the overall delegate count, but you've already had a tremendous impact. That was regarding Bernie Sanders. Next letter from Serdar Kilik, ambassador of Turkey, regarding Turkey's seizure of property for war restoration alarms Armenians. It has been made abundantly clear at the highest levels that places of worship will not be expropriated and that the right of ownership will not be infringed upon. This includes the Armenian Srp Garagos Church. Moreover, Turkey has taken every measure to preserve and, as necessary, to restore the property of religious minorities in Turkey. To insinuate that the steps taken to restore order in the city of Diyarbakir and rebuild certain neighborhoods struck by terrorism somehow reflects a historical tendency for demographic engineering is not only unfair, but also reflective of a mindset that tries to demonize whatever the Turkish government does, regardless of the context. It is the PKK that is responsible for the destruction of parts of Diyarbakir, and it is a responsibility of our government to help the inhabitants of Sur, the heart of Diyarbakir, among others, to return to normal life. As to the tendentious connection that the article tries to establish between what is happening today and the events of 1915, suffice it to say that it is Turkey that has been reaching out to Armenians to seek common ground based on mutual respect and understanding, as evidenced by the April 24th message of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And finally, a letter from Jacqueline A. Ottman of New York, advertising and millennials. This is regarding Madison Avenue selling itself. Advertising agencies' recruitment woes will be addressed only when they can prove to socially conscious millennials that the products and services they help promote will genuinely help people to live better, healthier lives. Amenities in the workplace cannot compensate for an economic system and business models that are increasingly being perceived as based on greed, inequity, and waste.
Let's take a look at the Expect a Miserable Honeymoon from Doyle McManus from the LA Times. The presidential primaries are a long way from over, but they've already produced an unhappy paradox. Both parties appear headed toward nominating the two most unpopular candidates in the country. Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, has accomplished an unprecedented feat. More than 2/3 of voters say they can't stand him. In the same unpopularity contest, Hillary Clinton, the likely Democratic nominee, is runner-up. More than half the voters don't like her. Ted Cruz, who still has a shot at the GOP nomination, is almost as unpopular as Clinton. In every major poll conducted since February, all three leading candidates are underwater. More voters view them unfavorably than favorably. The negative numbers are driven mostly by partisan animosity. Republicans are divided over Trump and Democrats are divided over Clinton, but voters in each party are united in disliking the other side's frontrunners by roughly 90% in each case. When the Pew Research Center asked voters how good a president each candidate would make, the results were striking. 67% of Democrats said they thought Trump would make a terrible president. Almost as many Republicans, 58%, said they thought Clinton would be terrible in the White House. We've never seen numbers like this before, Carol Doherty, Pew's chief political pollster, told me. And that has troubling implications for the next president, no matter who he or she turns out to be. After an election, presidents must bridge the partisan divide to get much done. But no need to wait for Inauguration Day 2017. We already know how this is going to turn out. We're pre-polarized. It's easy to forget, but in 2009, Obama arrived at the White House with a massive 68% positive rating in the Gallup poll, including 41% of Republicans. 8 years earlier, the newly elected George W. Bush enjoyed a 63% positive rating, including 37% of Democrats. The honeymoon didn't last, but the numbers meant that these presidents had at least had the benefit of doubt from the most independent voters and a significant minority in the other party. They both had a base of popular support from which to negotiate with Congress, but that's unlikely to happen this time. With the next president already held in record low esteem, both parties will be tempted to follow the strategy example set by Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell during Obama's presidency. Constant confrontation instead of bipartisanship to heighten the chance of gaining ground in the next election. Most voters still tell pollsters they want Congress and the president to work together and get something done, of course, but that sentiment never seems to be powerful enough to overcome partisan distaste for the other side. Political scientists call this affective polarization, meaning that the two sides just dislike each other. Whatever you call it, it produces the central political frustration of our time. Political parties that see little reason to cooperate and plenty of reasons to fight. Is anyone pushing back? Last week, a bipartisan group called No Labels unveiled a hopeful centrist program, a glossy catalog of sensible policy ideas, complete with poll numbers to show that each has wide public support. Among the proposals, allowing Medicare to negotiate with drug companies to get lower prices, which gets 82% support, passing a no budget, no pay law to withhold Congress's paychecks if a federal budget isn't passed, which gets 81% support, and increased funding for child care and early education, 79% support. The group has assembled a centrist problem solver caucus in Congress with almost 80 members drawn equally from both parties. We're trying to disrupt the dysfunction, said former Senator Joseph I. Lieberman, the Connecticut Democrat who chairs the organization, along with former Utah Governor John Hensman, a Republican. It's a worthy effort, but the hill they are climbing looks steeper than ever because in the presidential campaign, each side is already demonizing the other. That will make it even more difficult for the next president to bring the two parties together after January of 2017. Mike, you up to reading?
Thanks, Connie. We'll be moving on to today's living and entertainment. This from Cambridge, Massachusetts. When she was 15, the singer and songwriter Julian Baker had a suspicion. Maybe God made me gay on purpose and has chosen me for hell. It sounds like a precociously dark thought, but at that age, Ms. Baker was already moving past years of drug abuse and struggling to find the deeply held faith that now lives alongside doubt and self-laceration in her chiming, biting songs. Over the past few months, Ms. Baker, now 20, has quickly built a sizable and devoted fan base. Her debut solo album, Sprained Ankle, initially self-released, was picked up by the independent label 6131 Records. Critics took notice, including John Caramanica of the New York Times, who named it one of the best albums of 2015. On Wednesday night, she performs at the Bowery Ballroom. Growing up in Memphis, Ms. Baker, an only child, attended church with her mother and father, with whom she's still close. Her parents separated when she was in elementary school, and their ritual fell away. Ms. Baker started spending more time with older kids, smoking and drinking, and eventually turning to hard drugs. She remembers hearing someone talking about the painkiller Oxycontin and thinking, that's going to be the thing I do all the time. Eventually, my older friends started being like, maybe you should slow down. Ms. Baker was speaking at a Dunkin' Donuts in Cambridge, Mass. on Sunday afternoon, hours before a performance. Her addictive tendencies have migrated to the chain's coffee, which she often playfully writes about on Twitter. Mostly excited to be back in Boston, the holy land of Dunkin' Donuts. Excuse me. Fans have started giving her Dunkin' gift cards as tokens of their affection. She walked through Cambridge looking as close to 14 as to 20, wearing a canvas backpack that was nearly as big as she was. To call Ms. Baker tiny risked making her sound bigger than she is. Her black leather jacket featured a patch of a coffee mug with the phrase, "Sleep when I'm dead." While in the grip of addiction in Memphis, Ms. Baker would wander the streets at ridiculous times, and members of a local church took an interest in her well-being. They didn't ask any questions about my eternal soul, she said. They fed her when she was hungry, she explained, and they just took care of my needs because they loved me. And that was amazing. Because of her experience at progressive churches, Ms. Baker is convinced that being gay and religious don't have to be mutually exclusive. There's a lot of tolerance out there, she said, but even more than tolerance, acceptance and support. In conversation, Ms. Baker animatedly talks about her large circle of musician friends and about her favorite writers and thinkers, including Rilke, Kierkegaard, and C.S. Lewis. She recently made the decision to focus on music full-time, taking a break from her studies at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, where she has nearly enough credits to graduate. Her thoughts on Kierkegaard and company and on her own experiences are perhaps uncommonly articulate, but not extraordinary in a smart, earnest seeker of her age. What's atypical for any age is how she transubstantiates those thoughts into such potent songs. She performs them with a haunting, expertly modulated energy. Some, like the title track of Sprained Ankle, pass in a uniformly plaintive key. Others built to shrieking displays worthy of an exorcism. Ms. Baker has roots in the punk and hardcore scene. Her band, Forrester, which she started with a friend when she was 14, made a much denser, louder noise than Sprained Ankle. But if the melodrama of emo bands like Dashboard Confessional echoes in her solo music, so does the soulful keening of Jeff Buckley and the hushed, literate misery of Elliott Smith. Sunday night at the Sinclair, a club just west of Harvard Square, she performed in a gray t-shirt that read, Sad songs make me feel better. During the song, Everybody Does, the mostly reverent and quiet crowd loudly joined her as she sang, I know myself better than anybody else. The singer grinned and laughed her way through the rest of the dark lyrics, looking giddy at the communal moment. At church, it was always easy for me to kind of detach because it's not about you, Ms. Baker said before the show. It's about everyone's shared experience. She fondly recalled playing her song Rejoice for a crowd of about 10 kids in a church basement in Detroit last year. Near that song's end, she screams, but I think there's a God and he hears either way. When I rejoice and complain, lift my voice that I was made and somebody's listening at night with the ghosts of my friends when I pray. Despite such sentiments, Ms. Baker is leery of peddling inspirational messages to her fans. I don't know how explicit to be with it gets better, she said. I wouldn't say it gets better. We just get better at dealing with it.
All right, taking a look at my favorite column in the Lincoln Journal-Star, the week ahead in food. April 27th, National Prime Rib Day. Technically speaking, prime rib is a roast, not a steak. Also known as a standing rib roast, it consists of 7 ribs, the 7th through 12th ribs of the cow. When purchasing, look for bright coloring, marbling, and leave the layer of fat on top. It adds flavor to cooking. And if you're cooking it, please let me know. April 28th, National Blueberry Pie Day. Blueberries are one of the only foods that are naturally blue in color. Rich in antioxidants, blueberries are said to improve balance, coordination, short-term memory, and eyesight, according to Foodimentary.com. During colonial times, Americans boiled blueberries in milk to create gray paint, according to foodreference.com. April 29th, National Shrimp Scampi Day. And scampi means shrimp. So April 29th is actually National Shrimp Day, Foodimentary.com tells us. Shrimp scampi, as Americans have come to know it, became popular after World War II when many Italian dishes went mainstream, according to foodtimeline.org. April 30th, National Raisin Day. Everyone knows the raisin is a shriveled grape, which humans have been eating since 1490 BC, but the American passion for raisins dates back to 1873, when a California hot spell withered the grapes on the vine. An enterprising grocer advertised the shriveled fruit as Peruvian delicacies, and the raisin found its way into American hearts and stomachs according to Foodimentary. Half of the world's supply of raisins are grown in California. May 1st, National Chocolate Parfait Day. The word parfait is French for something perfect, which aptly describes the sweet chocolatey dessert according to mobilecuisine.com. Chocolate comes from a plant called Theobroma cacao, which translates food of the gods. And May 2nd, National Chocolate Mousse Day. Mousse is French for foam, so mousse au chocolat means chocolate foam. When mousse first hit the culinary scene in 1894, it was reserved for savory dishes like fish and vegetables. In the early 1900s, famous French artist Toulouse-Lautrec came up with the idea of mixing chocolate into the airy invention, which he initially called mayonnaise de chocolat. And finally, May 3rd is National Raspberry Tart Day. Today, most of us think custard-filled and fruit-topped pastry when we hear tarts, but the original tarts, dating back to medieval days, were filled with meat and served as dinner. Typically, tarts are made using a shortbread pastry with a layer of vanilla custard or pastry cream spread on top, followed by raspberries standing to attention. And that's according to eatocracycnn.com.
Thank you, Connie. And again, some articles about the arts and entertainment. Bollywood has a long history of portraying gay characters with cliches or using them as an ostensibly comic sideshow. Often they are sexual predators whom the male leads, epitomes of heterosexual masculinity, must be wary of. But several recent movies have challenged those stereotypes, suggesting that attitudes in India's movie industry, or at least within an influential section of it, may be changing. Aligarh, based on the true story of a gay professor who was hounded, possibly to death, opened nationwide in India in February to critical acclaim. It features mainstream actors, with the lead role Manoj Bajpayee in the lead role. A casting approach without precedent in Bollywood and unthinkable just a few years ago. Aligarh was followed in March by Kapoor and Sons, a multi-star big-budget Bollywood movie in which one of the two male leads is revealed to be gay. A tale of messy family relationships inspired by Woody Allen's Hannah and Her Sisters, the film surpassed roughly $16 million in revenues, the Bollywood gold standard for commercial success. The audience is more evolved than we think, Shakun Batra, the director of Kapoor and Sons, said. The success of Aligarh and Kapoor and Sons is likely to lead to more movies on this theme. One of them, Dear Dad, woven around a road trip involving a father and son, opens nationwide in India on May 6th. The Threshold, a short feature about an adolescent boy struggling with his sexual identity, had its premiere on April 8th in Los Angeles, although it belongs to the world of alternative filmmaking that is largely confined to university campuses and the urban elite in India. Time Out, a high school drama about a relationship between brothers that grows strained when one comes out, was released in September, although it did not have much critical or commercial impact. So far, the films have been confined to the subject of male same-sex relationships. The efflorescence of movies on the subject has not come about easily. In a country where the struggle continues to legalize gay sex, the movies have faced hurdles almost from inception. Aligarh was based on a 2010 case involving S.R. Siras that made headlines in India. Mr. Siras, a professor of Aligarh Muslim University in India, was surreptitiously filmed while having sex with a male companion in his apartment, and later suspended by the university on charges of sexual misconduct. The movie narrates his troubled last days, an invasion of his privacy followed by public humiliation and a professional witch hunt that ends in his mysterious death, considered by many to have been a suicide. Through the movie, Mr. Siras, in a widely lauded performance by Mr. Bajpayee, is a socially troubled man under siege in a homophobic society. India's censorship board gave the movie's trailer an A rating, equivalent to R in the United States, even though it had no graphic or sexual content. The mayor of Oligarh pressured local theaters to take it off the screens, leading to an effective ban. Mr. Mehta, who was unaware of Mr. Saras until a fan emailed him suggesting that his story had the makings of a movie, said he was not surprised by the backlash. A university that treats its faculty member in this manner is bound to be resistant. A town that renders him homeless is bound to be resistant. Mr. Batra and the movie's producers, aware that the film's plotline could be commercially risky, decided to avoid any mention of same-sex relationships in the movie's promotions. A big part of our society is homophobic, Mr. Batra said, and he did not want to alienate audiences by telling them straight away that this is a coming out of the closet story, and half of them don't even show up. Mr. Batra said that it was high time mainstream Bollywood portrayed gay lives in a dignified way. The impulse came from watching so many bad Bollywood movies that use homosexual characters as caricatures, he said. I was thinking, why are we making these characters comical? Why are they only there for promiscuous jokes? The movies arrive at a delicate moment in the long battle for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights in India. In February, the Supreme Court of India agreed to review its widely condemned 2013 judgment that reinstated a ban on gay sex, a law known as Section 377. The decision once again raised the temperature of the long-running battle between liberals and conservatives on the issue, a conflict within Indian society that reflected the reaction to Oligarh and Kapoor and Sons. The embrace of these new movies may also make them something of a bellwether of the direction in which the discourse on LGBT rights in India is moving. Section 377 will eventually be thrown out, Mr. Mehta said. Oligarh is part of the larger history that this country is going to experience.
All right, let's take a look at the Dr. K column. Dear Dr. K, I have diabetes and my doctor used to tell me my fasting blood sugar level needed to be below a certain number. Now he says it's okay if it's higher. Why do doctors keep changing their minds about the right thing to do? We doctors keep changing our minds because we're human, which means that we sometimes believe things that seem reasonable and for which there is some evidence, only to find out as more and better research is done that we were wrong. Suppose you were living in the 15th century and every clear day of your life you would see the sun rising in the morning in the east, moving higher in the sky, then at midday starting to move lower and finally setting in the west. And every clear night of your life, you would see the moon and stars also moving across the sky. Wouldn't common sense have told you that the sun, moon, and stars, the entire universe, revolved around the earth? I'm pretty sure that's what I would have assumed. I graduated medical school believing that I had learned the very best current treatments for different diseases. Of course, new and better treatments were likely to be discovered during my career, but I believed that every treatment I'd learned about was the best currently available and clearly better than no treatment at all. The first time I recall being disabused of that idea involved a treatment for bleeding ulcers in the small intestine and stomach, which were a very common problem then. A surgeon had a clever idea called gastric freezing. He developed a plastic tube with a balloon at the end of it. The tube was pushed down through the mouth into the stomach, and then a bedside machine circulated cold fluid through the balloon. The very cold balloon froze the lining of the stomach. It made sense that this would reduce the production of stomach acid, which was thought to cause and worsen the bleeding ulcer. It also made sense that it would encourage the blood to clot and the bleeding to stop. Every patient on which the surgeon tried gastric freezing told him they felt better afterwards. He published the results and went around the country talking about his new treatment. Several thousand gastric freezing machines with tubes were sold around the United States. Up to 15,000 people got the new treatment. Then several studies were done in which some people with ulcers were given the true gastric freezing treatment, and some just had the tube placed in their stomach without the freezing treatment. 30% of the people given the freezing treatment improved, but 34% of those who did not get the treatment improved as well. In other words, the treatment was no better and maybe a little worse than no treatment at all. Needless to say, the treatment ceased to be used. In tomorrow's column, I'll talk more about how and why treatments sometimes fall out of favor.
Thank you, Connie. Little business article about the movie industry. DreamWorks Animation may have found a suitor. After years of on and off flirtations, Comcast is in talks to buy DreamWorks Animation, the boutique studio run by Jeffrey Katzenberg that has struggled to move past the boom and bust cycle driven by its sporadic film releases. The possible deal would value DreamWorks Animation at roughly $3 billion, or about 30% more than its current market value, according to two people with knowledge of the talks, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss them. The negotiations were first reported by the Wall Street Journal. If a deal goes through, still an if, especially given DreamWorks Animation's checkered history with potential sales and mergers, Comcast would combine the company with its own animation division, Illumination Entertainment, according to these people. Christopher Melandandri, the chief executive of Illumination, which has found success in low-cost smash hits like Despicable Me, would most likely run the operation. That would almost certainly mean the departure of Mr. Katzenberg and layoffs at DreamWorks Animation, which is based in Glendale, California. A spokesman for DreamWorks Animation, home to the Shrek, Kung Fu Panda, and Madagascar movie series, declined to comment. Representatives for Comcast, which owns NBC Universal, could not immediately be reached. A spokeswoman for Universal Pictures declined to comment. DreamWorks Animation, which was spun off from Steven Spielberg's privately held DreamWorks Studios in 2004, probably drew Comcast's interest as an owner of intellectual property. Along with its signature movie franchises, some of which are dormant, like Shrek, DreamWorks Animation owns a library of older cartoon characters like Casper the Friendly Ghost, through its DreamWorks Classics division. DreamWorks Animation also supplies television cartoons to buyers like Netflix and is part owner of Awesomeness TV, a booming online producer and distributor of programming aimed primarily at teenage girls. In recent years, as the film business has become more franchise-oriented and as more nimble competitors, notably Illumination, have emerged in the animation field, Mr. Katzenberg has pursued various strategies to put his studio on stronger footing. In 2014, there was a failed acquisition offer from SoftBank, the telecommunications and internet giant. A couple of months later, Hasbro and DreamWorks Animation explored a merger, but that effort collapsed after Hasbro's stock price plummeted and a big Hasbro client, the Walt Disney Company, privately expressed displeasure. Mr. Katzenberg, who had over the years explored similar arrangements with various entertainment companies, including with Comcast, then decided to go it alone. In January 2015, he laid off roughly 500 employees, or 19% of his staff, and renewed a personal focus on movie making. So far, the results have been mixed. Kung Fu Panda 3, released in January, received positive reviews and took in $504.4 million worldwide, but analysts expected stronger ticket sales. Kung Fu Panda 2 took in $665.7 million in 2011. DreamWorks Animation pays 20th Century Fox a fee to release its films. Last week, Doug Kruetz, an analyst at Cowen and Company, wrote in a research note that he was concerned about the forthcoming DreamWorks Animation movies, including The Boss Baby, which is scheduled for next year. We think that being the fourth or fifth or sixth best animated studio behind Disney feature animation, Pixar, Illumination, and arguably Blue Sky and or Warner Brothers is not a good place to be, Mr. Kriot said.
All right, and in the business page on the Lincoln Journal Star, we have for years, most Berkshire Hathaway shareholders had to fly to Omaha, pay jacked up hotel rates, and line up early on a Saturday to hear Warren Buffett at the company's annual meetings. No longer. When Woodstock for Capitalists returns Saturday, anyone with an internet connection will be able to stream video of the question and answer session online for the first time, thanks to a partnership with Yahoo Inc. As Buffett put it in his annual letter to shareholders 2 months ago, the arrangement could reduce attendance, which strained the event space last year. More importantly, it'll allow a greater number of investors to check on this 85-year-old billionaire and his 92-year-old sidekick, Charles Munger. If we were partners with you in a small business and you were charged with running the place, you would want to look in occasionally to make sure we hadn't drifted off into la la land, he wrote. Shareholders, in contrast, should not need to come to Omaha to monitor how we look and sound. Consider it Buffett's latest foray into the digital age. While the Berkshire chairman and chief executive officer has long joked about still having a flip phone and hardly bothered to update the company's website from its 1990s dawn of the internet design, he did join Twitter in 2013, but even there, he's proven reticent to jump in with both feet. His account had just 7 posts as of Monday afternoon. Yahoo will be handling the technical aspects of beaming the executives around the world. In return, it gets to sell ads and sponsorship alongside the live stream. The webcast is the latest evolution of a meeting that drew a couple dozen people a year in the 1970s when shareholders gathered in the cafeteria of an insurance subsidiary. Because Buffett opted against splitting the stock as it soared in value, owning a piece of Berkshire meant being part of a fairly exclusive group. That changed in 1996 when the billionaire divided Class A shares by 30 to prevent fund managers from carving them up in trust and selling lower-priced interests. These B shares were later split 50-for-1 to help Berkshire facilitate its purchase of railroad BNSF in 2010. While the A shares trade for more than $200,000, a B share can be purchased for anyone with about $145 who is willing to settle for lower voting rights. Attendance at the annual meetings has climbed steadily as owning a piece of Berkshire became more accessible. Buffett's increased recognition as one of the greatest investors has helped too. Last year's gathering drew a record crowd of more than 40,000 people, filling the CenturyLink Center's main arena and its overflow rooms. Some investors already seem to be opting for the webcast. The Omaha World Herald reported this week that hotels, especially those a bit farther from downtown, still had rooms available. That's a stark contrast with last year when accommodations were so scarce that one couple ended up renting a guest room in a senior living facility, according to the newspaper, which is owned by Berkshire.
Thanks, Connie. We'll be moving on to sports. Curry's fill-in takes a far different approach. This concerning Steph Curry's fill-in while Steph Curry is injured. Postseason life without Stephen Curry resumed for the Golden State Warriors on Tuesday morning, and it was impossible for them not to sense his absence. At the end of practice, at the basket that Curry usually occupies with the assistant coach Bruce Fraser, Anderson Varejao filled the void by stepping in to take some jumpers of his own. Varejao, a reserve center, has had a fine career, but somehow it was not quite the same. At an adjacent basket, a player of greater significance to the team's postseason aspirations worked on his shooting mechanics. Sean Livingston, one of the most steady-handed backup point guards in the NBA, is expected to start for the Warriors on Wednesday night when they play the Houston Rockets in Game 5 of their first-round playoff series. It will not be a new experience for Livingston, who was pushed into a starting role when Curry missed Games 2 and 3 with an ankle injury. But with Curry probably sidelined at least 2 weeks with a sprained right knee, Livingston will shoulder even more responsibility as the Warriors, with a 3-1 series lead, look to advance without their best player. We've got to cut harder, we've got to play harder, and we have to defend harder, Livingston said. Every little thing. He covers a lot of mistakes, a lot of holes. If nothing else, the Warriors have used the series to become more accustomed to playing without Curry, and with some solid results. There was no bigger confidence builder for the Curry-free Warriors than the second half of Sunday's Game 4 victory. After Curry went to the locker room, the Warriors broke open a tie game and won 121-94 at Houston. I think this year we've gotten better at playing without Steph, the versatile forward Draymond King said. We figured it out. I think part of that is just knowing the offense better. But when he's out, everybody's got to be moving and everybody's got to be cutting. We need to get those easy baskets. The Warriors are not the only team to be hindered by injuries this postseason. Consider the plight of the Los Angeles Clippers, who announced Tuesday that Blake Griffin would miss the remainder of the playoffs and that Chris Paul would be sidelined indefinitely. Paul broke a bone in his right hand on Monday against the Portland Trail Blazers. Green said that coach Steve Kerr used the Clippers' bad luck as a teaching moment at Tuesday's practice. Nothing is promised, so take advantage of your opportunities. Few players in the NBA have a greater empathy for the injured than Livingston, whose promising career nearly unraveled in 2007 when he sustained cataclysmic damage to his left knee while playing for the Clippers. It took years for him to work his way back to being a productive player. With his own experiences in mind, Livingston said he was relieved to learn Monday that Curry had sustained only a grade 1 sprain, a mild injury, all things considered. Seeing what happened and how he fell, it could have been real ugly, Livingston said. I think he got the best possible news. In 2 seasons with the Warriors, Livingston, who is 30 years old, has cemented himself as one of the team's most reliable players off the bench. No small feat given the team's depth. During the regular season, he averaged 6.3 points and 3 assists and shot 53.6% from the field. At 6'7", Livingston also had the length to contribute problems for opposing players. His sweeping floater is virtually unblockable, and he describes his mid-range game as bread and butter. In other words, Livingston and Curry are completely different players. Curry creates space by operating along the three-point line and searching for seams. Livingston almost always tries to initiate the offense by finding his way to the post and exploiting mismatches against smaller defenders. It's a different game playing inside out, Livingston said, adding that with Curry sidelined, I've got to be more aggressive just because of the production that's out. Livingston went on. I don't expect to make all of that up, but that's a guy who leads the league in scoring, and he's the most valuable player. But it's really important to make sure we all remain aggressive and confident. We're trying to make a run for a few more weeks. So I don't think he wants to overexpose me or my body to 40 minutes a night of something like that, Livingston said of Kerr, who was named the NBA's Coach of the Year on Tuesday. But I feel good, trying to remain healthy. Livingston said he was open to the idea of channeling his inner Curry by trying an occasional three-pointer, which would be an unusual practice for him. During the regular season, he had just 12 three-point attempts compared to Curry's 886. But if shooting from long range helps extend defenses, then Livingston will be willing to mix it up. I think it just depends on the moment in the game, he said. For now, if not forever, Livingston will have more moments to weigh the possibilities that he could only have imagined just a few weeks ago.
Okay, let's take a look at Stephen M. Sippel's column. Wind howled Monday in Los Angeles, so disruptive that a high school canceled its football workout, which meant Mark Banker had free time late in the afternoon. Even so, the Nebraska defensive coordinator still had recruiting tasks to accomplish. He meticulously wrote postcard messages to coaches he had visited early in the day, basically thanking them for their time. Such notes are relationship builders and also keep the Huskers and the coaches and their players' thoughts. Banker finished up his messages and dropped them in the hotel mailbox. It's the little things, right? Nebraska is doing something right in recruiting. The Huskers class of 2017 is ranked 17th nationally by Rivals.com, and momentum is striking even after a 6-7 finish in 2015. That's pretty clear. Mike Riley, the second-year Nebraska head coach, believes strongly in the Husker program, and his positive energy flows throughout the staff, coaches, support personnel, all. I think organization throughout the NU recruiting operation has improved under Riley. For one thing, he has strengthened what Banker calls the personnel department. Those guys keep us coaches organized, as do our grad assistants, Banker said. They do a ton of film work, so it kind of cuts through all the fluff to begin with. Then we as coaches can get down to the meat and potatoes as to exactly who it is we're going to recruit. As for the positive energy, well, a salesman is much more effective if he believes in his product. It's about spreading the message and perhaps debunking a myth or two. Banker tells 2 recruits from California sitting in his office following the red-white spring game, he overheard them especially expressing surprise that they weren't in the middle of a cornfield, which was kind of neat, Banker said, when you think about it. We're talking about country in the middle of America, but really it's a city school. I think it's important for us to show parents and kids the downtown, the physical area that the university inhabits. I think that sells itself. I think it's a neat little college town / city. In that regard, Banker stresses the importance of a recent NCAA rule change, which permits schools to pay the travel expenses of up to 2 legal guardians of potential prospects during official campus visits. Because NU recruits nationally, getting parents on campus can be costly to the family. You hear it all the time from NU coaches. Parents are critical in the recruiting process. Riley's a coach that kids and parents love, and now he has the keys to a power program. Mike Farrell, Rivals.com national recruiting analyst, tweeted last week. Banker notes that relative fluidity of the recruiting process, pointing to his satellite camps as an example. Coaches knew they would be banned at some point, he says, but then suddenly, boom, they're indeed gone, at least for now. You have to push forward and be creative, Banker says. I'm mixed about it, he says of the ban. The only thing that holds me back from saying, hey, we need to keep doing it, is I wonder how you go about controlling it. But to just go out and say, oh, the poor kids, they're deprived. We need to have camps for them. Yes, but to me, a lot of that is a bunch of BS too. The bottom line is a lot of guys, all of us, just want another opportunity to go out and recruit in a different way. He makes clear the importance of satellite camps for programs such as Nebraska that are a distance from population centers. I mean, I'm down here he says, these are players all over the place. So for us to pick up our operation, go to a satellite camp, that's unbelievable, because now we get to be down here in the middle of it. He's in the middle of it, all right. Freeway traffic can be a pain, he says, so he takes to the road before 6 a.m. He can rest later in life, he says. For now, it's a crucial evaluation period in the NCAA recruiting calendar. After LA, it's on to Arizona, Las Vegas, and Hawaii. The beat goes on. And there's a couple more short articles he mentions, but do you have something else you want to share, Mike?
Yep, I'll just review a few of the Tuesday Major League Baseball scores and stories. First of all, White Sox streak at 5 as Sale and offense shine. Chris Sale pitched 8 innings and led the visiting Chicago White Sox past the Toronto Blue Jays 10-1 Tuesday night for their 5th straight win. Sale, who is now 5-0, has won all his starts this season and leads the majors in victories. Sale, a left-handed ace, has a 1.66 ERA. Sale carried a 1-hitter into the 7th inning, retiring 13 straight batters before Edwin Encarnacion homered. Sale gave up 4 hits in 8 innings, striking out 6 and walking 2. The owner, Navarro, hit a 2-run homer, and Avisail Garcia and Adam Eaton also added solo shots for Chicago. The 3 home runs, 10 runs, and 15 hits were all season highs for the White Sox. R.A. Dickey, who is now 1-3, allowed 6 runs and 8 hits in 6 innings. Dickey, a knuckleballer, is winless in his past 4 outings and dropped to 2-6 in 12 career games against Chicago. Some other scores. The Phillies beat the Nationals 4-3. on Andres Blanco's 3 hits, which included a 2-run homer. Boston Red Sox beat the Atlanta Braves 11-4. David Price matched his career high with 14 strikeouts. The Rays beat the Orioles 3-1, where Kevin Kiermaier hit a 2-run homer, and host Tampa Bay defeated the Orioles. The Rays have now won 3 in a row, with 11 of their 13 runs in that stretch coming with 2 outs. The Athletics beat the Tigers 5-1. Rich Hill allowed 4 hits in 7 scoreless innings, and Oakland won in Detroit. Marcus Semien homered for the A's, and Hill had little trouble breezing through a Tigers lineup. Mike Pelfrey allowed 5 runs and 9 hits in a loss. And finally, the Minnesota Twins beat the Cleveland Indians 6-5. Miguel Sano ended the game with a 1-out run-scoring signal in the 9th inning, giving Minnesota the win over Cleveland in Minneapolis. Thank you so much for being a Radio Talking Book Network listener and supporter.
Good night.
All right. That brings us to the end of your live reading for this evening. Thank you so much for
Very
listening
fun.
to Radio Talking Book Network. Thank you both our readers. I'm going to be showing on the rest of your program for the evening. And just thank you for listening.
Well, see you in a couple of weeks.
I probably won't be here on the 11th. But
Okay, is that 2 weeks? Yeah, it is.
that's 2 weeks. But I'll be here the 2 weeks after that.
I've got, trying to think. There's going to be some time in the next 2 months. I know I'm not going to make it.
Okay.
June for sure. I'm not sure about May. Anyway, we'll see you sometime.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.